Today we're going to have a look at a very interesting pistol, the Dan Wesson 357 Magnum. What made it so interesting was it's almost unique in that it's one of the few pistols where you could change the barrels yourself, and you could buy multiple barrels for it. It's a very well made revolver, and today we're going to do a complete assembly and disassembly of this pistol. My name is Jim Humphrey. I'm with Imminent Threat Defense Firearms Training. So let's get started. Of course, the first thing we're going to do when we start to work on a pistol is make sure it's empty. Revolver's pretty straightforward. Open the cylinder, hit the ejector rod just to make sure there's nothing. Check through there visually and physically touch those chambers. This gun's empty. We're ready to work on it.
Dan Wesson comes apart with relatively few tools. In the butt plate there's a hex nut. Grip comes off as one piece. Probably the next best thing to do is take off the barrel. For that I use a barrel wrench. I got this from EWK Arms. They make them inside here. You'll see there's a barrel nut, and the barrel nut has two notches in it that line up with the wrench. Break that free. Coral penetrating oil. Soak it overnight because you don't want to strip this nut. And there's a lot of fine threads in it. Could be a lot of corrosion built up in the end. Historically, they have a lot of trouble with those getting them off. So soak the heck out of it with the penetrating oil. The barrel shroud then comes off. And on this model, the crane and cylinder will now just pull out. On other models, you've got to pull the cover plate off, and there's a little retaining clip in here. Two cap screws here that hold on the cover plate. And they are different lengths. So you want to keep them straight when you pull them out, so you know which one's which. There's a short and a long. As you can see, they are different. So the short one goes up closer to the hammer. And then we want to pull this cover plate off. Now, it's a little bit tricky to get these off sometimes without knocking all the parts loose. But sometimes just a couple of wraps from a hammer. Don't like using a screwdriver on it. So with a few taps and a little bit of work, you can edge this off. Now there's a little catch right here. And then pull it off slowly, because generally what happens is this hand pops off and disengages from the spring. If it does that, don't worry, it's not that hard to put back in. There's a groove in the back of the hand here that engages that little arm in the spring. It typically pops off. So there's your workings. It's a good time to take a photograph of all of that. Normally I do this before I pull the cover plate off, but I'll decide to show you how it works. This is the mainspring here for the hammer. We're going to cock the hammer, and we'll take the long side plate screw and put it up inside the same hole that held the butt screw, this large butt screw. Well, I can go up inside of that, and I can thread this into the spring guide for the mainspring, and that takes the tension off the hammer spring. Now there's your guide in there. It's now retained by that little long screw. We'll leave it there until we get a chance to take it apart. There is actually called a trigger return spring, and we're going to just lift it up over the top, take it off like that, so we can now remove it from remove the hammer and the spring together, and we can see on the back side how they engage together. Trigger out, slides off this pin. There we go. So the cylinder stop had to go up. Trigger comes out. Here's our hammer block. The bolt comes out like so. We'll take the pressure off the mainspring, and do that. We need something that has a little hole in it, just a little cleaning rod. I can put a little pressure on it here, and I can get a hold of it. And now when I release this screw, I want to make sure I've got enough strength that I'm compressing that mainspring. So if I can't do it that way, I'll put a little down pressure like this and press down on it so I can take the tension off this screw, Now I can take that screw out by hand. Holding pressure on the spring, and very slowly let up on it. I can see the trick I did here was cleaner rod is just about the right size to put that pressure on there. The barrel unscrews. So now we have the cylinder alignment ball and the firing pin that can be removed. Cylinder alignment ball is held on with a screw on the back here. It looks like it's about flush, that screw, so we'll just a little cap screw there, very fine thread. And now there should be a spring and a ball in there that will springs catch it on the thread. There we go. So there's a spring to look at it, make sure there's not a front and a rear to it, and the detent ball should just fall out. So there's our detent ball cap. Firing pin's held in with a fairly small pin here. Alright, there's the firing pin. And a little bit of pressure on that to make sure we don't lose it. Now notice the firing pin has a flat spot on it, goes up, because that's where the pin goes across and retains it, the retaining pin. And then the firing pin spring is there. And okay, so let's reassemble the lower now. No particular tricks to it, just do everything in reverse order. Put our firing pin back in and get that flat side up so that when we put the pin through, it will retain it. We have to put it in a little bit so that the firing pin will be clear, and it's a brass hammer. Tap to recess it a little bit. That's perfect. Cylinder alignment ball drops in the hole there. Spring follows it. And our little cap screw. And we're going to be very careful starting this because we don't want to cross thread that. Remember we said it only went in about flush. We don't put it in too tight because it'll just compress that spring. So there we are. We didn't actually disassemble the hammer any further. We could do that real quick. The retaining spring just slides off. Slide that out. Make sure that detent doesn't get lost. There's going to be a spring behind it. Just compress and slide it back in there again. Okay, so now let's put in the mainspring. We're going to compress it. Find something like this that'll grab the end so we can compress it. It's easier to compress it by just pressing down on it. Press it right down, hits the bottom. Take that long screw, put it in there, and screw it down. Alright, so that's retained. So the bolt goes in next, and then the trigger and the firing pin block, put those two together and then drop them in as one. It's a little easier. The hammer assembly group now. Okay, like that. Trigger return spring has a little bit of tension here. We're going to get it up on top of that pin right there, so like so. We can now cock the hammer. Let the mainspring tension go. There's our side plate screw. Alright, everything's pressed into place. We can lubricate it as necessary. Let the hammer forward now, and the hand spring goes in this little slot. Remember we said on the back of the hand. Slip it in that slot. There we go. So that's the lower reassembled. Put the cover plate on. The cover plate has a little notch here that you got to get in first. So you set that in. Press it down. They should lay in place. Remember we said the back has the long screw and the front has the short screw. And then we put the grips back on. Reinsert the barrel. We're going to make the barrel adjustment once we get the cylinder back in. So I can just see it starting to appear there, so we'll leave that alone for now. Alright, so let's have a look at this cylinder. It is a right-hand turn cylinder, so we'll grab it with a pair of padded pliers or a piece of leather and hold the ejector rod. So there's a little collar with the spring, the ejector rod here. Pull the ejector out. We can take the latch out. It's held in with a fairly small pin here. Comes out, and it has a very unusual spring arrangement. It has a normal coil spring in here, but it's put in like a U. So, like that. The spring goes back in a U shape like that. Slide the latch back in. You want a little quick tap to get it flush. So we can reassemble the cylinder. Place. Now, because Dan Wesson intended for these barrels to be exchanged for different lengths, the kit from EWK also comes with the 6/1000 shim. There are a couple different size shims, but the 6/1000 which you use in these 14s, model 14s, 15s, and the 357. So we're going to place the shim in between the barrel and the cylinder face, get it down to where you just move the shim without too much effort. Barrel shroud back on again, barrel nut back on again. Nice and snug. Feel that shim still moves. Some people say it's just about as much tension as it takes for that to fall out on its own. Dan Wesson says check that after you've fired a couple hundred rounds, and quick function check. Looks like we're in business.
Well, we've been through the Dan Wesson. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, I'm Jim Humphrey with Imminent Threat Defense Firearms Training. Join the NRA, enjoy your firearms, and be safe out there. Thanks.